Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to another weather forecast by Adrian Weather Forecast. And it's going to be a little bit more of a long-range update and overall a discussion on the interesting pattern change for the end of next week. Here, we are watching out for multiple shortwave troughs as well, looking out for the potential for severe weather and as well for extreme cold blasts and snowstorms. So we have a lot to talk about. We have a lot of overall diversity in the weather potential for much of next week. Here, we have a lot to talk about and a lot of potential and just overall, just a lot to discuss, including, like I said, severe weather, snowstorms, cold blasts, etc. But without further ado, let's get in the video. So let's now go ahead and look at the 500 millibar high and high anomaly here. So obviously, we're seeing a pretty big and extreme warm week, or at least we saw a really warm week for the past few days, and it's going to continue all the way up into the early portions of this week here by till obviously today, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. We're going to be seeing some pretty extreme heat across much of the central and eastern United States, as we're going to be seeing a really stubborn, oops, that's not what I want right there. Let me do that again. There we go. A very stubborn high pressure right here, pretty strong high pressure that's going to cause a huge area of really warm and dry weather across the Midwest and as well portions of the eastern, northeastern, even northeast United States as we go all the way up into Tuesday, October 5th. This high pressure continues to strengthen as it pushes eastward and it gets pushed by an upcoming cold front. And it's actually going to strengthen that warm air and that dry air, so being significantly above average temperatures across much of the Great Lakes and portions thereof, even portions of Ontario, as well portions there, Quebec. We're going to be seeing some really, really warm air. I mean, we're talking about unseasonably warm air all across the basically central and eastern United States. It's going to be a huge blob of warm air, but that will actually change as we now get into really later in the week here. We're still seeing that high pressure really strengthening, but it's going to push kind of towards the northeast. So that kind of warm air and dry air will significantly kind of calm down a little bit. So we're going to be seeing some slightly above average. But as we now get into the weekend time frame, basically a week from now, we're going to be seeing a very weak upcoming a negative tilted short wave trough, which is going to be coming in from the subjet the Pacific subjet is basically what I'm going to say. And that's going to cause a pretty small blast of some cold air there. And I'm watching that as well. First, some severe weather potential across the central plains and as well the overall areas of Kansas, Oklahoma, and even Nebraska. Going to watch out for some potential severe weather as we're going to be seeing a really favorable negative tilted shortwave trough. Basically, that's going to allow obviously a pretty significant jet or dip in the jet stream there as well, going to cause for some variable conditions. But I'll get a little bit deeper into depth and as well information as we go later in the video. But as we now get now into early in the following week here, the 12th, we're seeing a very significant negative tilted shortwave trough. And it's going to be a very strong shortwave trough, bringing in a massive blast of Arctic air. Going to be seeing some significantly cold and as well unseasonably cold temperatures across the west here. So we're going to be seeing a very significant pattern change, whereas we're going to see now a huge cool off in the western United States and as well to the central United States, and then a little bit more of a warm up specifically for the northeast and as well portions of eastern Canada. And it's going to push now by October 13th. Going to be watching another day of potential severe weather, a negative tilted trough. Basically, you can kind of see there it is, the negative tilted trough. We're going to be seeing a really strong dip in the jet stream here. That's where this cold air is going to sneak its way in from British Columbia as well Alberta. And then watch out for some very significant cold air as well. It's going to cause a huge kind of stream of kind of positive tilted vorticity. And that's going to allow for some really as well potential for some severe weather and as well for some snowstorms. So with the amount of moisture we're going to be seeing in this area, I'm going to watch out for some pretty significant amount of cold air and as well of snowstorm potential. And as we go further south, we're going to watch out for more severe weather potential. But this is a pretty strong shortwave trough here, and it's going to continue to just cause frequent cold air. So we're going to start seeing that pattern change developing over the week and a half. So we're going to go from very warm eastern and central United States to possibly a really cold and as well a huge pattern change for the eastern and central United States, and as well for the western United States. So we're going to start really seeing that shift in that weather pattern as we now look at the overall looking at the pressure. So obviously really high pressure across the central and eastern United States from that strong high pressure in place above the Great Lakes, and be seeing anywhere from basically maybe around 1,028 to 1,030 millibars. So you're going to see some really high pressure. There's 1,028 millibars. This could cause some really dry and as well warm air across the Great Lakes all the way to the point we get towards really the 7th and even 8th of October. Still seeing that stubborn warm air as well, so it's going to kind of cause a lot of rain to kind of stay in place, kind of in a I guess you could say, a stationary boundary kind of staying in place right there. It's going to be seeing some constant amount of rain across the southeast United States. But look at the high pressure. It's really strong, so I mean, it's not going to get any better for the northeast. However, as we now get a little bit further into the west, there you see that huge dip in pressure there, seeing a few low pressures are getting as low as 1,001 millibars. So we're going to be seeing out as well out of part with this trough, going to be seeing pretty significant low pressure. It's going to be a low pressure that can very well be more of a severe weather potential, but the low pressure following on October 13th will be a pretty big snowstorm maker. But there you see that low pressure kind of just goes kind of to the north at 995 millibars, and then we have another low pressure developing here from the shortwave trough, and this is as well going to be the main, I guess, severe weather maker as of what we have so far, because obviously we already have a description from Broyles on the SPC for day 7 already mentioning the probability for some severe weather, and as well model gradients, but we do not have a 50% as of yet. But there you see, there's that low pressure. So that kind of track to the northeast, going to be seeing a huge negative tilted trough, kind of supporting, kind of just ejecting that shear towards the northeast here, coming from the southwest. So we're going to kind of see that really strong dip in the jet stream. Obviously, really good. Obviously, negative tilted shortwave trough. That's going to really cause it overall, just alone, a pretty good environment as well. We're going to be seeing that as well. The temperatures with its huge, significant kind of boundary and a kind of deviation between the cold and warm air. So as well, going to be seeing some pretty good instability within this low pressure, kind of splitting it off as well, watching out for probably a pretty significant dry line. So we may see an overall really good fall setup for the plains with this low pressure at 998 millibars. And then we have another low pressure. This one's going to be this is going to be the main low pressure as of now. We've actually have a decent amount of model greens between the GFS and European within this low pressure at 1,000, or actually 990 millibars. You can see we're going to be seeing some really rather low pressure. So we're going to have to watch out for some snow potential in the Rockies with this cold air and as well amount of moisture. And then watching out as we go now further to the south into the plains there into Oklahoma, Kansas, and Nebraska, and watch out as well for some severe weather potential. But overall, you kind of see that the difference in the pattern between now and the next few days to then later on in the next week or so. You can kind of see more frequent shortwave troughs. So it looks like we're going to kind of be merging into probably it looks like a negative, actually no, I believe a positive MAA. So here's now look at the temperature anomaly here. So let's go ahead and see right now, obviously really warm air across much, if not almost all the United States, basically, specifically across the Great Lakes and Midwest for the next few days or so. Going to get really basically as high as maybe 18 to 20 degrees above average. But like I said, right now it's basically almost the whole United States for the next at least 3 days. It's going to be really, really warm. We may see some cooler air developing kind of to the Pacific Northwest near Seattle and Portland, that general vicinity, as we're going to be kind of seeing the very front boundary and kind of just front part of that cold front as early as this Wednesday across the Northwest. But still, that's going to really strengthen that high pressure that's in place in southern Canada. That's actually going to as well strengthen the amount of kind of warmth. So we're going to basically go from really 20 degrees above average to as high as 32 degrees above average. Like I said, it's unseasonably warm air, and then of course going to stay really, really warmer across the Dakotas and as well the Midwest. So to me, it's going to be basically summer-like temperatures in the early October timeframe, which is definitely not something we typically see whatsoever every single year. But then that cooler air starts to again creep its way further every single day in the west, and again start getting basically around anywhere from 10 to 15 degrees below average. But look at that warm air, it continues to strengthen now 32.4 degrees above average across portions there of Ontario and portions of just overall in the overall portion of just south central Canada. Basically, is going to be absolutely hammered by this really warm air. And look at the United States, the eastern and central United States still well above average, while now the west is getting a significant and kind of a well-needed cool off. Not going to get anywhere from basically 20 plus degrees below average across California. And this is as this cold front, as this subtropical, or as this this negative tilted trough in this Arctic blast starts to make its way towards the west. This warm air is going to dramatically as well kind of increase and strengthen as it goes towards the east. So now going to get really, really warm temperatures across the Midwest. Going to get anywhere from basically 30 degrees above average across the Midwest there. Going to be seeing basically from 18 plus degrees above average all the way from Texas to New Mexico, all the way up towards areas near Ontario and Quebec. And of course, this warmer is going to continue all the way to the 13th. But look at that. Really, I mean, we're talking really significant cold air across much of the western United States. That's going to be a pretty significant pattern change. You're going to be seeing anywhere from 23 to 25 degrees below average. So it's going to be a pretty big, significant potential for a pretty big factor towards potential for some upcoming rocky snowstorms. But like I said, there's the actual low pressure we see on the 11th. So, like I said, it's going to kind of be seeing an interesting kind of cold front, or kind of be like this, basically, an interesting cold front, basically, kind of dipping that way. There's a cold front, and there's a warm front. So, we're going to be seeing a pretty good setup here with some cold air behind this to possibly cause a pretty significant outflow boundary on the system. But there you see the really strong inflow and then the outflow within this low pressure. So, it looks like a pretty good setup here. So, I'm going to watch out for the severe weather potential on the 11th. And then as well, going to watch out by on the 13th, another low pressure. But look at this cold air. I mean, look at the difference. You split the United States in half. You see basically anywhere from maybe 25 or even 27 degrees above average across New York to as low as 34 degrees below average across the Rockies. So we're seeing a pretty significant split from basically summer and winter. We're not going to be seeing really any fall type characteristics, really, except maybe for the southeast here. But I mean, look at this huge split in the United States. We're seeing really dramatically cold air and a huge pattern change, and then a huge warm up for the eastern United States. I mean, that's extremely significant. So it's going to be a pretty big potential factor for upcoming winter storms. So if we have any more low pressures or shortwave troughs or anything with moisture, we're going to be seeing some definitely significant potential. And it's going to continue to move eastward. So as we now get later into mid-October, this colder air will start to push its way into the eastern United States. But again, definitely watching out for some significant, a really significant cold front, as well as watch out for some significant shortwave troughs and frequent shortwave troughs that could very well become, as well even a severe weather factor, and even a concern for some severe weather on the 11th or even the 13th of October. So we have a lot to talk about, a lot of potential. It's going to be very interesting and busy end of next week and early of the following week on, again, really past October 10th is going to be the pretty interesting time frame. So let's now get a look now at the overall temperature forecast, so we can get an overall look at the overall, like, we obviously saw, like, the degrees compared to the average, but let's actually look at the overall, like, real-time temperature so you guys can get a better understanding of what it's going to look like. So obviously you're going to be seeing pretty warm portion of the overall eastern and central United States for today. Obviously it's going to continue into the weekend, or not weekend, sorry, into the early weeks. So obviously you're going to get really warm temperatures across the Dakotas, unseasonably warm temperatures, obviously. Going to get into the upper 80s and even the lower 90s. That's going to be very similar to the southern Texas temperature, and that's definitely it's common to see these type of temperature similarities in the summer, but in early October, that is definitely not too common. I mean, as we now go into October 5th, you're not going to get actually possibly even warmer temperatures in the Dakotas than portions of Florida, Louisiana, Oklahoma. Going to get into as well the lower and even mid 90s. And for October 5th and early October, that is absolutely crazy. But there you see that cold air is starting to sink its way in closer to the northwest United States. Going to get very cold overnight lows as we get into the morning of October 6th, and get into obviously the lower 40s, and as well into the Sierra is going to get into the 30s. But look at the overnight lows for the Midwest. It's going to be very warm. I mean, not getting past the 60s in some areas for the overnight lows. That is summer temperatures, not even fall, but that is directly summer temperatures. I mean, look at that. Really, really warm air, and it's going to continue. But you guys could kind of get the point of it. It's going to be very warm. But as we get now towards the 9th and the 10th, that cold air is going to start to make its way into the west and as well as central United States. Obviously, now the overnight lows will be a little bit more reasonable, but still slightly warmer. We're going to get now into the upper 40s as well, the mid and lower 40s, and then the Sierras and Rockies obviously can get pretty cold into now the 30s and 20s. Even some spots we can get some teens. I mean, that's going to be very, very warm as well. Even 7 degrees into portions of British Columbia. But obviously, this cold air is going to start to make its way into the United States. And I wish this would go a little bit further out so you guys can get a better idea in the actual really cold air in the 10th, 11th, 12th, and 13th and 14th. but I'll show you guys that later this week so you guys can get a better idea. But you guys see the overall difference between the really warm air from the basically the 90s to now some more reasonable temperatures. Obviously down to the Midwest, not only getting highs into the upper 70s. So we're gonna start seeing that kind of pattern change developing by the end of next week. So here's now a look at the 6 to 10 day temperature outlook, and I've actually have not checked the 6 to 10 day outlook, the 6 to 10 day outlook in over like probably over a year, maybe a little bit less than a year, because I did not know they actually made new graphics. The old graphics, everybody who watched my videos back then remember the old graphics, but I did not realize until today when I actually brought up this slide that they got new graphics, and I'm actually very happy they have new graphics because the old graphics were absolutely terrible. But here's the new graphics. So the 6 to 10 day outlook, obviously having kind of the United States being split in half. Basically, it was very, very cold to then extremely above average temperatures. Obviously, going to be seeing that really stubborn high pressure kind of just north of the Great Lakes, which is going to kind of just bring in really dry and very warm air all across the Northeast Great Lakes and as well the Appalachias. And then by obviously we start to see that negative tilted shortwave trough kind of dipping into the United States. And it's going to allow for that really cold layer to stick around across the Rockies and the Sierras and overall the western United States. So you're going to be seeing basically fall to winter type temperatures between the 8th and the 12th, and then basically summer temperatures all across the eastern United States between the 8th and the 12th. So basically, obviously, this is going to be the new pattern change, basically really cold western United States, and eventually after past the 12th, this cold air will start to push its way into the plains and as well in towards the Midwest. So let's now look now at the 500 millibar high anomaly here on the overall shear forecast, and we're looking at a pretty good setup here with a few shortwave troughs. The first one obviously kind of ejecting from the southwest, and there it is basically the low pressures right there. There you see negative tilted basically by the way you see the ice bars are set up, and they're kind of just basically all southeastward. So that's how you know that it's basically looking at a basically negative tilted shortwave trough. That's going to allow for some pretty good amount of shear basically centered across the eastern portion or east side of this low pressure. Can be seeing anywhere, let's see here, values, pretty good values around 68 knots, 65 knots, anywhere from basically 50 to 65 knots. It's going to continue to strengthen as we now go further into the plains by October 11th. Going to be seeing a really good negative tilted trough. It's going to really eject a lot of that shear all the way up as high as Nebraska. But obviously the low pressure going to be mainly kind of towards specifically the Kansas area. So the main area to watch out for severe weather will most likely be across the general vicinity. But really good shear, obviously, is going to be more than just shear. That is obviously going to be a part of this severe weather setup. Obviously, it's still pretty far out, so we're going to have to look at it more of the synoptic synoptic mode and get a better idea with that. But still, although it's still pretty much 8 days out, there's been a ton of model kind of agreements here in the past few days. So that's why I've kind of mentioned this just ever so slightly because of the amount of overall agreements, but really good amount of shear in the mid levels here as well. We're watching out for some pretty good as well upper level support here. I mean both upper level and lower level support for this negative tilted trough. And obviously it's going to kind of weaken. The thing is though, we're going to kind of be seeing a pretty small warm sector, really little to no really Gulf of Mexico moisture or anything like that kind of ejecting from the Gulf. So it's going to be basically kind of more of a squall line mode, nothing too crazy. Could see a few scattered elevated supercells, but nothing too crazy with the setup. But look at this now. This is going to be a big, scary, really strong negative tilted trough, and this is a really strong trough, and it's going to be a pretty strong low pressure. It's also going to bring in some significant snow across the Rockies. So this low pressure itself is going to kind of be cross country mode, and most likely kind of just be a cross country, more likely strong shortwave negative tilted trough, and it's going to bring some really significant amount of shear here. I mean, look at that amount of shear. I mean, 110 knots and 500 millibars. So this is actually a pretty good setup considering it's 500 millibars. This is basically 18Z, and then my 0Z seeing some really good amount of basically southwesterly is kind of one like that. So you have to watch out for a pretty decent warm sector with some really good amount of overall shear here, kind of splitting up into this kind of conveyor belt right there. But obviously it's going to be pretty far or too far out to look at anything kind of detail wise, but we can kind of get a better idea. There's a decent severe weather setup, nothing too crazy as well. Watching out for a pretty significant dry line setup on both of these setups, or both of these days, the October 11th and the 14th. Because obviously going to be seeing kind of an Anna type cold front developing here with some pretty steep, not pretty steep dew point deviation here. So as we now kind of go into October 10th, you're going to be seeing that cold front with that really low dew points and that really cold air in general. And then we see very little moisture kind of developing in the Gulf of Mexico. There's really not too much. I'm only seeing dew point in the 60s and lower 70s, which is basically nothing compared to the Gulf of Mexico moisture we typically see. But there you see by 15Z start to see this really steep dry line starting to set up right here. That's going to allow for some decent instability towards the east here, but like I said, it's going to be a very, very small warm sector and pretty thin, so nothing too crazy. And by the time we see kind of like a dry line setup like this, it's most likely kind of gust out. But look at that, really strong though. And that's a really, really strong dry line going from basically 65-degree dew points only to basically into the 20s. So this is a really sharp dry line. However, with this really small warm sector we're seeing, it's most likely going to gust out and stay at a squall mode. And then same thing by October 13th, it's going to be seeing a pretty strong apparent gust mode. It's most likely to be a squall mode or even a QLCS mode, but you can see a little bit thicker of a squall or a little bit thicker of a warm sector. But it's going to kind of be like an anti-cold front with its pressure deviation, really cold there in the backside. So it's going to allow for some type of severe weather setup, but most likely not going to be anything more than a slight risk. Obviously, it's still pretty far to say that as of now, but with the little bit more moisture kind of spreading out, and there you see that really cold and unstable air gonna meet it basically right here, this very thin warm sector. So we're gonna have to watch out if there is gonna be another setup as well. Last but not least, let's now take a look now at the weather bells MSLP here. Let me actually change my screen a little bit smaller, and we are going to be watching out for some snow potential, obviously. As we now let's go all the way up to basically October 9th. Let's get closer to October 10th. There you see, with that cold, they're going to be seeing some small snowstorms, or some small snow flurries, and some small scattered showers of snow. But by October 11th, there you see kind of that setup right there. Pretty good amount of precipitation going on along with that front there. So pretty good, strong low pressure with a lot of that moisture basically just ahead of that warm front, or sorry, just ahead of that cold front. There's that really sharp cold front basically like that. And there you see the warm front basically kind of going out like that. So you're going to be seeing a very thin warm sector. Obviously, it's going to be very hard to get a better idea this far out, but you can kind of get the general idea. We are looking at first a model greens. And then as we get now to October 12th, and that general time frame, that cold front will continue to advance further into the eastern United States, allowing for that colder air to now push into the Rockies. And that's going to allow for some good snowstorm potential. And as we'll notice how compared to the last snowstorm we had the Rockies like a week ago, this is actually going to be more less than elevated base. And it's going to be more towards even the lower elevations now into areas like Billings, Montana, and as well getting into portions of central Nevada. So we're starting to get into that kind of fall type pattern here, where it's not just kind of a September pattern where it's only snow in the highest elevations, because look at that. Now going to get some snow probably going all the way down into New Mexico, into Colorado. This is like a pretty significant or a pretty significant snowstorm here. And this could be our first named snowstorm of the year here. So, I mean, look at that setup, though. Really good low pressure. Obviously, you're going to be seeing that warmer air and a little bit more of that moisture with that colder just behind that. Behind that cold front. It's not allowed for a lot of snow just to stay on the western portion of this low pressure. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys later.